I'm a mom first over everything else. Nothing is more important than the safety of my children, and I will burn down the house. I love them that much.
When Julie's child came out as LGBTQ, her conservative religious world cracked open.
What she saw inside the church shook her faith, but also saved her family.
From the Eucharist used as control to Pride weekends in Texas, this is not your average Catholic mom story.
This one is for the kids who need to hear, you are worth everything, and you are never alone. Welcome to Whiplash with Maxwell Kuzma,
the show where two queer Catholics, Max and Emma, dive into the dark and twisty Catholic faith we were handed.
And the beautiful mess we're building in its place.
It's a journey of exploration, excavation, and deconstruction.
As we challenge the limited view of God we were taught,
and embrace a fully affirming, expansive Catholic faith.
No topic is off limits, and no question is too big or too small.
We're in this together, figuring out how to reconcile our queerness with our Catholicism, and maybe, just maybe, even reimagine them both.
So buckle up, folks. You might experience a little whiplash, but we're here for the ride.
Let's go!
What would you do if your church told you to choose between your faith and your child?
Today's guest refused to make that choice, and it changed everything. Julie was once part of a far-right Catholic parish that weaponized the Eucharist, pushed politics from the pulpit, and treated LGBTQ people as expendable.
Then her children started to come out, and she realized it wasn't her kids who needed to change. It was her.
Now she's gone from conservative churchgoer to ally mama dragon, fighting for LGBTQ youth, hosting pride events, and challenging the church to live up to its own teachings.
This episode is about faith, deconstruction, and the power of unconditional love in a world that too often demands silence.
This is Whiplash, and it's a story you won't forget.
Julie, to start off, I would love if we could do a really zoomed out look at kind of what it was like growing up, like a basic overview of like what your family life was like, what the faith life was like, and then kind of how you developed to the point where you got to now.
I grew up in a very conservative religious home in Texas. I grew up in a very conservative Episcopal church. Now that's really kind of interesting because it was not a Catholic church. The Episcopal church back in the early 2000s made some very quick changes regarding gender, sexuality, gay marriage. Now, at that point in time, I did not understand how critical and how important those changes were. So what happened is that since I was in a very conservative Episcopal church, that started a whole realignment movement where basically most of us who were in that setting moved over with the conservative alignment movement. That is probably one of the biggest regrets of my life, because if I would have understood then, and remember that was back in early 2000s, so that was like 22 years ago. That was a long time ago. Okay? My children were very young at the time. I did not know anything about sexual orientation and gender identity at that point, nothing. All I thought was there were two genders and they were supposed to be attracted to the opposite gender and get married and have families. And that's all I knew at that time. That's actually for almost 10% of the population. That is not true. So that could set my faith journey, my family, kind of they were very abrupt changes that a lot of people did not understand. We were in very conservative Anglican circles, and I've learned this the very brutal and difficult way that very conservative, traditionalist type circles can not only be toxic, they can also be dangerous, and especially if there's a political upheaval. And that's kind of what happens. So we were in those types of religious circles, very conservative Anglican circles. Back in 2000, It was about 2017. Our very conservative Anglican church had a very abrupt split. I had actually just had neurosurgery. I have Parkinson's disease, and it went to a horrible split in the church. And that is when my husband went, and I went to the Anglican door to the Catholic Church. Not too long after that, we just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And that's when COVID hit. I try not to use curse words, but something hit the fan when COVID hit. Okay. And all of the toxicity and the allegiance to the far right of the political spectrum and everything toxic related was completely revealed in a very, for me personally, it was in a very abrupt, almost like very militant fascist way. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. Just very, very cruel, very militant fascist, like either you align with Trump or you're out. That was the kind of militancy that I experienced in that conservatives' door to the Catholic Church. And so I literally had to make a run for it. And I thought, do I leave the Catholic Church now? What do I do? So my husband and I went to the downtown cathedral, but it is a pretty progressive place. Everyone was welcome. They were very good about following science, following COVID guidelines. People were wearing masks. They were checking temperatures. And with Parkinson's, that was the right place for us to go. But we literally had to flee that conservative church where Anglicans go into full communion with the Catholic Church. It was a very unsafe place it would have been an unsafe place for anyone who did not militantly align with the religious or the Catholic right. And we knew that something was terribly wrong with that. Well, so fast forward, spending some time at the cathedral downtown, much more progressive place, much more open and welcoming in a place. I wouldn't say affirming, but definitely more welcoming. And that's when my eyes were opened to many things, such as most minority religious people do not vote for the far right, do not align with that culturally and otherwise. And then I realized that the majority of Hispanic Catholics voted Democrat. Now, after being told that I would spend all of hell and eternity if I did not vote for you know who, I realized I was lied to. So that started a major deconstruction process for me, that whole traumatic experience of going to the downtown cathedral. And I am very, very grateful that all of that happened, even though it was very difficult. I'm very grateful it happened because it prepared me for the first child coming out. When the first child came out, I knew my child was in a great state of distress. And so what I did is I sought out LGBTQ organizations. I took classes. I wanted to learn. I had to learn. I knew I had to learn because I knew that my child's life and well-being depended on me learning. I knew that her level of distress coming out, and when you know your child's in trouble, and meaning not in trouble, meaning they've done something wrong, because they've done nothing wrong. But I knew that my child's well-being depended on me getting my act together and me making changes, not my child. I knew this is who my child is. Sexual orientation and gender identity are a huge part of the human identity, and they're intrinsic and cannot be changed. Let's think about the heterosexual people for a minute. Do you think that our sexual orientation and our genders are a huge part of our identity as human beings? And that would be true for anyone. So if you apply that to any person who is in a minority category, which LGBTQ people are in a minority category a little under 10% of the population, probably about 9.5% of the population, and about 1.5% of the population is gender expansive, then we have to apply the same principles of humanity to all people. And I realized about a month into the parent training classes and about a month into the parent LGBTQ community, I realized how ill-informed and how misinformed, not just ill-informed, but misinformed, how I had believed some not good things that I had been told by the religious right. And I say that as a collective. I can't believe what I had believed. So this was a little over 5 years ago, maybe right about 5 years ago. I have committed my life to helping other families like myself, other parents like myself. I am the regional activities director for a group called Mama Dragons that helps moms from pretty conservative religious backgrounds. It was actually started by Mormon moms. So if that tells you anything, who've become fully affirming. And Mormonism is probably as conservative as it gets, or pretty close to it. And they have all kinds of education and training classes that have helped moms become fully affirming. The bottom line is the reason why it's so important is that it boils down to the sanctity of life. So people call themselves pro-life, they need to listen, because one fully affirming parent of a gay or lesbian child drops the suicide rate pretty much in half. And if the child is gender expansive, either non-binary and or transgender, it drops the suicide rate by 75-80%. It is incredibly important to the child's life, their life, their life longevity, their health, their better overall health, for at least one parent to be fully affirming. So
I love it. I really appreciate you sharing it. And I think one thing reflecting on this is that we are grateful that you are here, because so many people who are probably listening today, queer and trans people raised in the Catholic Church, often have relationships at odds with their parents because they believe that children's lives aren't as valuable, like in terms of the faith that they have, or long term, that like holding a non-affirming status is less important than maintaining the line and the doctrine of the church, that continues to push kind of a homophobic, queerphobic agenda. So what you're talking about, and what I think is so incredibly important, is understanding that this is not just an issue of faith. This is not just an issue of personal choice. This is an issue of life and death for many queer and trans children that are just trying to exist in these spaces.
Yes.
And parents like you who understand that this is not a change that a child has to make, a child knowing who they are, but a parent coming to understand and learn more about the community and how they can exist and support them unconditionally, is suicide prevention. This is how parents serve their vital role of unconditional love.
I tell my kids, by you being yourself and by parents being fully affirming, other people seeing that might save a life.
100%.
My children went to a very small religious schools, or they all did. Okay. So it's like half the class came out.
I love it.
It's like, and so I just tell them, look, you are loved here. You're accepted. This is a safe space. And I'm a mom first. I'm a mom first over everything else, over my religion. And Ashley, faith and being a mom go hand in hand. Faith and spirituality are different than being part of organized religion. Nothing is more important than the safety of my children.
I think it's so important. And as you say at the end of what you were sharing about faith, how do you rationalize and find in important pockets of affirmation within Catholicism? I know what you say is that not necessarily within organized religion, but faith and motherhood go together with this idea of unconditional love. How do you find that as a Catholic person? How does that exist in your Catholic faith?
Catholic social teaching is one of them. When we talk about the sanctity of life and the dignity of the human person, there should be no clergyman, no Catholic that is of good faith that would recommend placing another person's life and well-being in jeopardy for the sake of upholding doctrinal teaching regarding sexual ethics, that they are willing to, let's think about this for a minute, because we have a certain program that starts with a capital C still going on throughout the Catholic Church. And I've actually reported them to the Vatican before. Okay. So talk about the moral fire. Okay. The thing is that they're willing to continue this type of widely discredited practice. We're talking gay conversion therapy, reparative therapy, that has been condemned by every single major medical association in the world. And they are willing to continue this and falsely draw families into it for the sake of trying to uphold doctrinal teaching at sexual ethics and play Russian roulette with their lives and their health. And I did my homework and I'm like, this is dangerous. This is dangerous stuff.
Themes of unconditional love and service to the community are at the heart of what the Catholic Church is.
Yes.
So just as you mentioned earlier, a lot of Christian nationalist, militant, fundamental communities are trying to warp what exists at the center of Catholic doctrine around love and parenthood.
Exactly.
100%.
We cannot put other people's lives in danger, and their well-being and their mental health and their spirituality in grave danger, not just a little bit of danger, grave danger, for the chance that slim chance that they might be able to either live a celibate life or switch orientations, because that doesn't happen, by the way. We know that. It is criminal, in my opinion, because that's already been discredited by every major medical association. We need to make safe and welcoming and affirming spaces, because not only every major medical association says that, years of ministry and practice have proved that.
I'm curious, like, when you were in more of the fundamentalist Catholicism, what that looked like, what brought you in there, and like what that experience was like.
I didn't know that it was a fundamentalist Catholic space. It's called the Anglican Ordinariate. Anglicans and especially more conservative high church Anglicans are very attracted to it. I did not know what I was getting into. I'm going to tell you that right now. There's only one of those types of parishes here in San Antonio. And I can tell you, with the rise of the political upheaval and COVID combined, it showed all of the skeletons pretty much at one time. That was the terrifying thing. Like, oh my goodness, this is fascism full blown here. And so, but the thing is, the forced move to the downtown cathedral was the best thing. That started the whole deconstruction process, the whole process of me opening my eyes to Catholic social teaching, and the beauty of learning about social justice. The social justice arm of the Catholic Church is unbelievably wonderful. It showed me radical, unconditional love of all people, of all faith. So when I first went in there, I didn't know what I was getting into. I thought, okay, well, this is the Anglican door to the Catholic Church. Remember, my family had been in very conservative Anglican circles. Due to the realignment movement back in the early 2000s, it was a huge thing. It was like half the American Episcopal Church. I mean, it was like half the church, or even, I would say half. Yeah. So it's pretty big. But when we went in there, I thought, wait a minute, there's something that's not right about this. I kind of like knew there was something. Of course, it was all revealed at COVID and election time. But the first thing I noticed was they were using a catechism, and this was in the Ordinariate, the Anglican Ordinariate, which was much more conservative than the worldwide Catholic Church, I noticed. Very anti-Pope Francis, and I thought, wait a minute, something's not right if they're against the Pope. Okay, something's not right. And so they had a catechism that talked about homosexuality is the most grievous thing that someone can do. And I thought, there's something's not right about this when they're demonizing this worse than murder and worse than any other thing. Something's not right. So I knew something was not right. And then on top of that, during COVID, because of my condition, I thought I only wanted to take communion once a month and like take only the wafer. And I had, very kind of specific things about how I took the Eucharist and everything. And they were, no, you need to come in every week. And we need to make sure you come in every week. It's important for your spirituality. You know what? That's not what they were doing. They were using it as a method, the Eucharist as a weapon of control to bring me in there. And then they were asking, well, who are you going to vote for? I thought, well, I don't like this Trump guy. There's something that's not right about this Trump guy. And of course, that's when all the Pandora's box was opened up, and I started to see they were not happy with the fact that I was not supporting Trump. So, yes. And then just the callousness of COVID and not being mindful that there might be some sick people, some people with medical conditions, maybe even some children that might be getting cancer treatments. We don't know. And they're just they started off spacing people with masks and stuff, and they just kind of like threw it all out the window. And then they had a case in there and they had to shut the whole parish down. They were required to. But just the total callousness of not being respectful of vulnerable people. So basically their attitude was only the strong survives in here. And I thought, that's not Christianity. That's not the love of Jesus I've always known, that only the strong survive and the rest, you can boot yourselves out. I was as mad as a hornet's nest. I can tell you that right now. And I reported them to the Vatican. I did not realize how submissive I was to the patriarchy. I was conditioned to think that the patriarchy was very important for the survival and the well-being of the family. But here's the deal. When it is weaponized for abuse, which many times it is, it makes vulnerable people, they puts them in a more dangerous position. Those are the main things that I experienced in that trad environment. And I think that was part of the reason that Pope Francis was putting the restrictions on the Latin Mass that he was putting on, because those kinds of abuses were going on. So I have not had a church experience like that ever since we went to the progressive church. And I'm so happy. I cannot tell you. It is a joy to be out of those conservative spaces.
So I know that your deconstruction process was in there, and that ultimately, of course, you landed at this affirming place, and you even said that your faith is important to you, like still. Because for myself as a transgender man and a lifelong Catholic, figuring out how my faith was still important to me was complicated when seeing some of these same themes that you're talking about, seeing these things play out, seeing people that I had known for my whole life just, let me go, stop talking to me, not want anything to do with me. That had a really big impact on me, and it took me time.
For Catholic parents who may be listening right now, who maybe are on their own journeys and aren't to that point of being affirming yet, or maybe haven't even started that journey and are still navigating what that looks like and what they need to do, what advice do you have for them? What would you share?
I can tell you right now, I will just say this up front, depending on where you live, will determine what kind of help that you can access. Because here's the deal. The more red the area is, the more you have to step outside of your community to find help. The Catholic support in this area is not good. Let me tell you that right now. It is not good. And so we've had to kind of piecemeal. That's how we've kind of ended up skating around with several affirming churches, like the Methodists and the Episcopal. There's still a Catholic identity to me. When I was confirmed in the Catholic Church, almost a decade ago, there was something spiritually that happened to me when I got confirmed. And so part of me will always be Catholic. There is the website called the Gay Church, and there are now 4 Catholic churches listed as have met the criteria for the gay church. That is pretty amazing. So, but it is a huge diocese of like over 100 churches and only 4 of them. So this is what I'm saying, has a long way to go. Now, if we were up in a blue state somewhere like New York State or California, they have booming LGBTQ Catholic ministries, booming. And that would be so much easier.
I'm especially glad that you bring up this point about that it really matters where you are.
Yes.
Especially in Catholicism, growing up as always having been Catholic for my faith formation, that's definitely something that I saw as I started my transition. For example, in 2023, I went to my first outreach conference, which it blew my mind. First of all, it blew my mind that there was a Catholic priest who was visibly saying, hey, LGBTQ people are allowed to be here, basically. And when I went to that conference, it was in New York City.
Wow.
And so as I was there and I was going to St. Paul's Church there, I just really had this experience of this is what it could be like if, we let all the members of the LGBTQ community actually participate. This is what it's like if I can stand side by side with a Catholic lesbian, with another Catholic trans person, with a Catholic gay man and his husband. And so it was really like a revelatory experience. And it's definitely something I spend a lot of time thinking about now, because we all know like there are very conservative dioceses in various places where they make it very difficult to be part of the LGBTQ community, where they'll have, a center that has a sign that says all are welcome. And when there's a new bishop, he comes in and takes it down. And to me, that's just,
yes.
That very much feels like the opposite of, again, what the gospel is about. Like, how can you take down a sign that says all are welcome? But I'm leading to a question, I promise. And I wanted to ask you.
It just makes me sad. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you touched on Pope Francis with his limiting of the traditional rites, the masses. And what I wanted to ask you was, watching him do these things like having a friendship with a gay man, Juan Carlos, where he was advised by him and was in connection with him, or watching him meeting with transgender people like myself and others. And then even with the institution of the same-sex blessings. I was curious what you felt with all this stuff that was going on for you, watching Pope Francis engaged in those actions.
Pope Francis was very transformative for me. Because, and here's the reason why, because when the forcing to the cathedral happened from the very conservative, fundamentalist conservative, and I did not know I was getting into I did not know what it was like until we got in there. He was very transformative in my faith becoming a social justice lens and moving away from more rigid conservatism. And plus, my kids coming out had a huge, impact on that, because nothing comes over my children. Nothing. And so, but watching him do these LGBTQ positive things was transformative to me as a parent, because I thought, if the Pope of the Catholic Church is making positive comments and telling parents not to reject their children, but to love their children for the way they are, I need to be listening to this, because there's more to this than what the religious right wants us to believe. The religious right wants us to believe that sexual orientation and gender identity are all about promiscuous bad behavior, when that is absolutely complete misinformation and false. that sexual ethics, sexual activity are a very small to almost non-existent part of LGBTQ identities. It is about the sanctity of life, their safety, their health, their well-being, and nothing should be compromising those things. Nothing. And so Pope Francis was a huge integral part of me understanding that and shifting to the social justice arm of the church.
And I also am curious, looking forward to our new Pope, Pope Leo XIV's legacy for the church. What do you hope for a future of inclusion and supporting not only queer Catholic children, but also parents that are eager or still learning to love and accept their children?
Yeah, I actually have quite a bit of hope for Pope Leo. And here's the reason. The reason is he is spot on when it comes to the poor. He is spot on when it comes to the common good of society. He is spot on when it comes to not aligning with you know who. Okay. And he's spot on so many areas of Catholic social teaching and carrying on the mission of Pope Francis. Now, I do think that he is naturally more conservative than Pope Francis was when it comes to LGBTQ identities, which is a little disappointing, actually a lot disappointing in some regards. However, in my own personal journey, I was somewhat like Pope Leo. I was more progressive all along when it came to racial justice, immigration justice, universal health care. I was more progressive kind of all along in those areas, but more conservative when it came to LGBTQ identities or gender, sexuality, gender roles, marriage, and all those things that if I can come around, I think Pope Leo can. That's kind of the way I see it. So, but he's not a parent, and being a parent is a totally different matter. There is a catalyst inside the heart of a parent that is unstoppable. If they love their children, it is unstoppable. I've actually become pro-choice, and I'm just going to say it out loud. I'm going to say it, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, that was the very last area for me to jump the fence on. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, when I saw these draconian, dangerous anti-abortion extremism laws hit Texas and put women's lives in danger, I said, that is it. No church and no legislator should be in the exam room between a patient and a doctor for any reason that involves gender affirming care, abortion, and so forth. And you know what? I have said this, and I'm going to say it. I think that some clergy who have tried to exert their authority over civil society, and even Catholics within the church, okay, not just civil society, they tried to exert their authority by force to exert doctrine on other people at the expense of putting them in danger. I think they've lost moral authority. These kinds
Absolutely.
of they have lost
100%.
authority. I'm going to say it strongly.
Totally.
The thing is, these kinds of personal decisions, where you're talking about the personal interior life, the spiritual life, the medical care, the family decisions, are so personal and should be respected and honored. They should be left up to the individual conscience. And what people do not understand is that the magisterium of the Catholic Church says that there is nothing more sacred than the individual conscience of each Catholic and each individual. I'm not saying anything goes. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is all doctrine should be used as a guardrail, not as a weapon. And that is what I have seen with church doctrine, especially in the areas of abortion, contraception, gender, sexuality, anything relating to sex and gender, which is, in my opinion, kind of sick, to be honest with you. And using those as weapons to exert over society and not leave up to the individual's I think it's very immoral to coerce the conscience of the individual people to a dangerous level. And that's what has happened. And that's what is still happening. So
100%. I'm so glad you said that. And I think it's incredibly important how we're thinking about pro-choice conversations and reproductive justice hand in hand with gender affirming care.
Very much so. Because when they get into the exam room and they don't know what is going on with that patient, they are jeopardizing not only the patient, but the doctor who's trying to serve that patient. They have no business, absolutely no business. And so, because I think they have lost the ones who've gotten involved with this and are playing like puppeteers from behind the scenes, they have lost the clergymen who have done this. And I'm talking about groups of the hierarchy, not just individuals, but there's like collective groups in certain states, i.e. Texas, who have been playing the puppeteers behind the scenes, the hierarchy, and they have been way too involved with weaponizing these doctrinal teachings into civil society and into the church. And they need a good wake up call. So they need to they need to focus on real issues like the common good of society and Catholic social teaching, not weaponizing doctrine in the areas I mentioned. I know what it took for me to come around. I had to get educated. I was so uneducated. Years of misinformation, politicized and everything. You have to get to know LGBTQ people. On my journey, it wasn't just the classes. It wasn't just me getting educated, but it was actually meeting LGBTQ people, meeting ministers who work with LGBTQ people, and even doctors. I reached out and said, I want to understand this. I've got to understand. My kids need for me to understand. But the key is the desire to understand. The desire to understand has to be there for the parent to come around. And if the desire is not there in the beginning, it can reach a point where if the lack of desire persists and there's various levels of rejection and various levels of, non-affirmation can be harmful over time. To be aware that they really need affirming and accepting and safe spaces. For me personally, as a parent, I wanted to be one of those spaces. I knew I had to be one of those spaces, and I had better figure out how to make that happen. So a parent's love should know no bounds, and a parent needs to do whatever they need to do because a parent's love for a child, there should be no limits on that. But that expectation for all parents is not realistic. And so that's what I'd like for it to be. That's what it should be, but it's just not realistic. I'm not the norm. I'm not the average parent. If you want your child to survive and thrive and do well, you need to figure this out. I mean, that's how important it is. So.
And I just want to also, as we close up, affirm that for anyone who's listening, it's important to understand your boundaries and to keep yourself safe, just as Julie said, so that not every parent is going to have this journey. We're hopeful that they do, but just keeping yourself safe as part of this and finding the people in your life. It may not be a biological parent. It may not be an adopted parent, but someone who can be your chosen family throughout this journey and support you.
I encourage you that if your family's not affirming, there are support groups for those individuals to help them find chosen family. Finding accepting space is extremely important for the well-being of the LGBTQ person. And I say that to the young people who might be listening. That space is it's life and death. It's so important because it wears on you over time. You do not want to be in non-affirming spaces for the long haul. That finding that welcoming and affirming space can save a life.
Julie's story is powerful, but it's not universal. Not every parent makes this journey. Some never do. And that's a hard truth that many queer and trans people live with.
But Julie can show us what is possible. She's what an ally looks like: imperfect, learning, bold in love. Her story is a model, not a map. And if you didn't get a parent like her, we see you. You still deserve safety, dignity, and joy.
The work of healing, of rebuilding faith, family, and community takes time. It's not easy, but voices like Julie's remind us unconditional love has to be more than words. It has to be made true through practice. Love is not only spoken, it's shown and it's acted. It's something we can choose to build together while also choosing to protect ourselves and honor our boundaries.
Thanks for listening. And wherever you are on this journey, whether fully affirming or still questioning how to integrate your faith and identity, you are not alone. We are just one resource among many, providing insight and perspectives along your personal journey. Julie's story is meaningful and important, but we're eager to continue this conversation with you, our listeners, through the comments on Substack and on our social media.
Goodbye!